Hi, everyone. Really happy to be back doing this episode of podcast with you all. And today I have another overseas guest. Today we got Marlene Cameron, and she's a business leadership and life coach, and she's also a speaker and trainer. So, first of all, welcome to my show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Fantastic to have you here. Now, very quick introduction. So, first of all, Marlene, she has been training, coaching, and mentoring business owners, executives, and mental health professionals since 2002. So, she has been around for a bit. And she had a successful career in interior design, then as a business owner, management consultant, and financial analyst. So, wow, a lot of different qualification here. So we're going to talk about how all that becomes, her path, the path she's in right now. She has an MBA and CFA, as well as all her coaching qualifications. She now works with entrepreneurs and leaders to discover the clarity to be more calm, certain, and connected. So that's a very short introduction. I'm sure you have more to share with us. But first of all, welcome. And I know that this is a very cold day in where you are and compared to Australia. So so I love the fact that we can do this over such long distance and also be able to hear very different people's perspectives. So yeah, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you again.
And so I think the first question I had when I was preparing for this interview is that nowadays we hear a lot of women, very successful women, they have a bunch of credentials like yourself, right? So we heard the MBA, CFA, and all that stuff. I think we're in a culture where, because now we're given the opportunity, so women really try to seize the day and really dig deep into the potential to really live a life that matters and do the best they can. But I think sometimes it's a two-sided coin, because on one hand, we're given opportunities and we can really, do whatever we want in a way to achieve our ambition in life. But the other side of it is that I also hear there's a lot of struggle to do it or have it all, or there's a lot of complexity behind the other side of now we have the opportunity to do so. So, now you have all these accomplishments and credentials. I'm sure at different time in your life you have faced something like that. So what was your biggest struggle behind the scene? And that's before you discover your clarity.
Well, my biggest struggle behind the scenes, that's a great question, by the way, is for so many years, I felt very inadequate and had a lot of self-doubt. Sometimes it's referred to as imposter syndrome. So women, and I shouldn't say mostly, men experience it too, but women even more so, that are obviously very intelligent, highly accomplished, successful professionals, entrepreneurs, leaders, who really struggle because they haven't been able to internalize their capabilities and internalize what they've achieved. And so there's this fear that they've given the wrong impression, that they're not that good, and that they'll be discovered as having kind of duped people into believing that they had the capabilities.
And is that why you actually get a bunch of qualification? Do you think that's your way of responding to it? Because I know some people try not to shine, not to, get out there as much, because sometimes we're crippled by the fear of those imposter syndrome and so forth. But for you, what was your way of coping with getting another, very difficult, very big qualification?
Well, it's because of the inability to kind of own it is, for me, it's like looking for that external validation, and that so with credentials and degrees and diplomas and things look like, gave me the credibility I didn't think I had myself. So I needed to come from outside of me, and have the proof, if you will, that I was capable, and had really achieved a lot of these things, and didn't think it was any big deal.
And I guess many people can relate to this. So at what point then suddenly you felt, you could have keep on going. I mean, we could have add 5 more of these at the end of the
Exactly.
intro.
Few
So
PhDs. Yeah.
yeah, and it can be like, I find it for a lot of women, it felt like a never ending target. It keeps moving. So, oh, but like, maybe after this I should have that, because that shows that I know this as well, so it will complement we make up excuses to say why we need to get another proof or qualification to speak. So when did it come to sort of a converging pattern where you say, wait a minute, what is that I really want to do? Where did your clarity came into play?
I think the clarity came from an experience I had. I was in a program where there was ongoing mastermind groups, and we were talking about networking and meeting people who maybe we could support or help in some way. And somebody had said to me, why don't you just invite people for coffee and just see if there's anything you can do to support them?
Like really simple.
Really simple. But I heard this voice in my head. Literally, it said, what would be the point? You have nothing to offer. And this is, after, I had my own successful business, had, lots of formal education and lots of real life experience. And I was so rattled when I heard that. I was telling a colleague of mine, she says, Marlene, maybe you want to look at that. So I went and got some help and worked with, worked with kind of a coach counselor. And it's like what I call like the unraveling, like starting to understand, like what was that all about? Where was that coming from? And so it took a little time, but I found something even more recently that really helped me understand and finally kind of set me free from all of that fear and self-doubt. And so, yeah, it was quite the journey though.
That was quite a challenge, wasn't it? Like the fact that someone just offer, like basically not even offering, just mentioning why don't you just talk to the person for coffee, and you got a lot to offer. That's obviously your friend had that assumption or belief that you had a lot to offer. Even a quick coffee will help the other person. But for you, that becomes a very big deal on the contrary, to think, what? And so what happened next? So you start to look at this particular situation and say, hey, hold on a minute, why am I feeling this way when everybody else seems to agree that you have lots to offer? Why do I think, oh no, it can't be? I mean, is that simple? So what happened next?
Well, I came across I'll call it an understanding about where our experience of life comes from, and it was very different from what I'd been led to believe up to then. I think we're led to believe that our experience of life comes from outside of us, like we're in reaction to situations or events or people or even memories. But what I learned is that our experience actually comes from inside of us. Everything kind of flows through us, and specifically it comes through our thoughts. And so if I'm feeling anxious or worried, it's actually my own thinking that's having me experience that. It's not anything anybody said or didn't do or didn't say. And so if we fall into habitual patterns of thinking about, I could have done that better, or that person knows more than me, innocently, we're creating that the stress and pressure to perform that comes from within inside of us. It doesn't come from the outside world. So once I learned that, it's like, okay, so if I understood that when I feel inadequate, or if I don't feel good enough, or I don't feel I measure up, that's actually coming from me, from these old patterns of thinking, right? And the thoughts in and themselves aren't true, obviously, but because we feel our thinking in the moment, it feels real. Right. So we've all done that little experiment. You can say to yourself, like, I'm not very good. And you can literally feel your energy go down in your body. And 2 seconds later, you can say, I've got this. I'm pretty good at this. And you can feel your energy lift. So we're actually responding to our thinking. And even if somebody said something to us, or we could take it so many different ways, right? You know, if we're feeling lighthearted and in a good mood, it's like, oh, that person's just, they're just having a, bad day. And, I'm not going to take it personal. But if we're kind of a bit in the funk ourselves, and something somebody might say, we can interpret it in a way that we feel even more, hard on ourselves.
And, you make me think about, recently I also look at that sort of a framework where how you feel obviously come from what you think about just before, right? So then looking at the thoughts and think about whether, look at it in a very neutral perspective, whether it's my thoughts and is it true, is it a fact, or is it a story I make up, really helped me to, look at it differently. And then 10 seconds later, my feelings may be gone, because once I realized the feeling comes from this particular thought, and this thought is not even true. Or maybe like, sometimes it's even something more external, like you had a bad night's sleep, you were grumpy over something, you didn't have food in the morning, many other reasons to cause that sort of leaning into certain way, looking at some fact or our own thoughts, and then we create those feelings. So tell us a little bit, so how do you do you like prepare yourself like a clean slate or neutral slate? So how do you start your day with a more open and neutral perspective, so we don't sort of think ourselves into bad feelings?
Well, I when I can, I start my day with activities that just have me be more present, right? So I might do a little bit of reading. I might do a little bit of yoga. I used to teach yoga years ago. I might, if I've got time, I might go for a walk. And so it's interesting, because when we're present, we're not entertaining lots of those kinds of thoughts, right? We're just enjoying the moment and being in the moment and being attentive to the moment. And then we kind of fall back into our thinking, and then that unsettling feelings come up, and it's like, okay, so I've just fallen back into that thinking. And, if I can become more present, and I can, because that's the only place we can deal with life, right? That's the only place we experience life, we can deal with life, because that's where the creative ideas will come from. That's where the solutions to problems will come from. So the more we're aware that, especially if we start to, our mood starts to go down and we start to feel nervous, it's like, okay, so I just know that that's coming from thinking. And sometimes the thinking is actually invisible. Like, I don't know what I'm thinking all the time. We have tens of thousands of thoughts every day, but it's like our emotional, people call it emotional intelligence, but all it is like a built into the system. So we're being notified in terms of where our thinking is gone.
I sometimes find it like a bit of a detective work. Like if I suddenly feel, why am I feeling so edgy? Then you kind of follow the breadcrumbs, right? Then you're like, oh, because I was thinking those things, or I was doing certain things, and that leads to this. So I really resonate with what you said, the presence. So first of all, self-awareness. When you're aware, then when you can be very present, it felt like that's where you experience life, the truth. And you're not hijacked by those random thoughts, true or not, right? So everybody have different way to get into the present. So some people, like said, walking or reading, and meditation, all these things help. But yoga, I definitely think a 10-minute time for yourself in the morning really helps me to get into what you call presence. For me, it was just my morning ritual. I do it automatically, and I don't even analyze the effect. But now when you talk about it, I realize that's when I try to have a clean slate. And I think the magic is to find your own way to get there. Like everyone is different, and I never want to like preach or ask people that you have to do this, you have to do that. I mean, I didn't read that book, but I think there's a book about 5 a.m. club for successful people or something. Like it's a very like a sad way of how to get to this amazingness that we all after. But I don't think you can have one size fit all.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because our default state is actually mental well-being. Like if we fall out of this thinking that's having us feel, nervous or anxious, we'll naturally feel calm and present and alert. And so it's anything we can do to sort of disrupt that. You think about, a hurricane, and there's that calm in the middle of the hurricane, and then there's all the swirling cloud around the outside. And it's like, okay, I'm in the swirling thinking cloud thing right now, because I can feel it. And sometimes it's just a matter of just noticing, and then we can kind of start to relax and become more present. I've experimented with actually just getting curious about what that feeling is in my body and kind of following it around a little bit, and then it just kind of dissipates on its own. Or I'm more deliberate, and just, okay, it's time for a break and go for a walk or something like that. So because I don't think we can do one thing in the morning and guard against any type of like discouraging thinking throughout the day. It's just understanding that our emotions will let us know when we've kind of run off track and falling into the am I good enough, who am I type of thinking, and just to bring us back and say, okay, I'm here, I'm present, I can handle this.
Yeah. Now, perfect segue when you talk about the storm and eye of the storm, because I know you mentioned in your work that the clarity effect, that the 4 states. So it's like a bit like the weather. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I created the model because I think that we don't often understand that when individuals go into feeling stressed or nervous or overwhelmed or something, we tend not either it's very difficult to make a decision, or sometimes to make decisions that we're not happy with later. So I use the metaphor of the weather. And the first, you think about, the rung of a ladder. So if you're on the bottom rung of the ladder, I call it dense fog. So this is it's pretty self-explanatory. People don't have a lot of vision, foresight, tend to be, very overwhelmed, overthinking, often, overworking. It's like when we can't get a clear mind, we kind of go around and around. And so what somebody would feel who's experiencing this dense fog effect is a lot of pressure to perform, and sometimes even panic. And because they're so overwhelmed, often they overwork. They may not even take breaks until they get, sick or something like that. Struggle to make decisions, often have like a never ending to-do list, and tend not to delegate. And so if they have people working with them, they have a small team, the team may not be working effectively because they don't have the clarity either, what's important, what needs to get done. And so that, sometimes the people will experience that their business is just sort of languishing, right? Yeah. So the next stage, I called it partly cloudy. So this is when, the business leader or owner would have kind of that moments of clarity, or it's like, oh yeah, this is what we're going to do. This is the direction we're going to go. And then it's almost like the clouds roll in. It's like, I don't know. Do you think that's a good decision? Do you think, that kind of the self-doubt and the second guessing? So there's kind of this stop and start effect. And I personally experienced this quite a bit too, because I think I've got an idea, then I start to kind of question myself. So you're in this category when you're still working long hours, and probably don't take a lot of time off work unless you're kind of pressured to do so by
like
family
Christmas.
or friends. Yeah, exactly. Take time off or else, right? And the to-do list is kind of growing and shrinking because, when we have that clarity and we do make good decisions, things start to kind of smooth out, we feel more productive, and then, it can kind of go sideways again. And again, the team is kind of hot and cold, according to the leader. And business results, of course, are unpredictable because, because there's not that continuity and that consistency. So the next level, we'll go up the ladder a little bit. I call it light haze. So obviously there's greater perspective. You can see a little bit further. But for the business owner leader, it can feel a little monotonous even. Somebody might even feel a little bored. It's kind of like Groundhog Day. So, so the business or the work is manageable, but there may not be a lot of excitement there. And the leader, maybe takes time off for work, but takes work on vacations. Takes work on vacations. And because there's not kind of that clarity or whatever, there's usually not risk taking, and for business to grow and to evolve, people have to take risks. So they have to have the confidence to make some, decisions which might feel really challenging. And the team might be doing okay, but there's not a lot of creativity and innovation in the business. So it's kind of going along okay, but it's not particularly exciting or rewarding. And then the fourth category, kind of, you go take this big step up the ladder, I call it blue sky clarity. So this is, you're here as a business owner or leader when you just have this confidence and this ease. It's like, this lighthearted feel, the ability to be very focused. You can make decisions and almost as if you're guided by like a higher intelligence. It's like, something will come to mind and you just know it's the right thing to do and can kind of follow through and give the vision to, people who are working with you. And so the business owner doesn't have to work so hard. Can take time off, maybe even, work quite a shorter week or take extended holidays and things like that. And because the owner or the leader is able to delegate with a lot more clarity and confidence, it gives confidence to the team. And so they know what's needed, what's expected of them. They're able to use their own creativity and their own innovative ideas. And it's just a much lighter, fun place to work. And so inevitably the business does well, and sales and profitability is really almost beyond what the owner or the leader kind of expected. So we go from that dense fog where things are feeling quite bogged down and the business is languishing, to this blue sky effect where there's just this lighthearted creativity and kind of like what we call like a flow state, right? People are kind of working in that zone state. So
that's
yeah,
exactly what I was having in mind when you're talking. It's in my work, I would call it, you're in the flow and you're not bucking the current, because you have the clarity, you have the ease, and things are going really well. So obviously my burning question on that is that, so now, great, we know our fall state. I know I'm bloody in the dense fog. So what do I do? And does it take long to get from one state to another? Like sometimes, oh yeah, I realize that I'm short of breath, so my health is not great. Or, oh gosh, I realized I haven't had a vacation for 4 years. Then let's say you have that realization, and then what's next? How are we going to move, without struggle through it?
Right. Well, when I designed this decision clarity advantage, I called it, is there's like 3 components. So the first one, I called it an MRI. So mind rescue incubator. Like you have to rescue, your busy head and your thinking and the proverbial snow globe with all the little particles in it. And then you set the snow globe down and all the particles, shift to the bottom, and you've got this clarity, right? So you can see clearly, you've got, there's space in your mind for newer, fresher ideas to come in. So that's the first part. The second part, I call it an IOU. So an inside out understanding. So there's 2 aspects to this. It's realizing that your experience is coming from within you. Like if you're experiencing any anxiety or stress or worry, that's coming from within inside you. That's not coming from the outside world. Because as you know, people deal with the same situation differently. But the other part of the inside out understanding is that that's where the answers are inevitably going to come. I mean, somebody might, they might have some suggestions, or you could brainstorm, or you could kind of see other people's best practices. But the right answer for you is actually going to come from within you. So from within, inside you, right? Through your own insights, your own intuition, your own aha moments. And so the third thing is what I call fit, or this fresh, insightful thinking. I don't know if you recall the quotation by Albert Einstein. It says, you can't solve a problem at the same level of thinking created it, right? So you have to kind of, step back from all of the analyzing and comparing and organizing and, going back and how we did it last time, and created this space for these new fresh ideas to come, because that's inevitably what's going to take you to the next level, or take your business to the next level. Is it's going to come from, not from your own knowing, but this deeper intuition, this deeper, we all have this kind of this inner dimension where we have access to this universal wisdom and this deep insight and fresh ideas.
So I think they make total logical sense. So once we know our states, we know we may need help. We need to get out from this bad weather into the blue sky weather. And then these are really great processes to sort of coach us and guide us with our mind to get to where we want to go. But how do you apply it with people? So was it through conversation? Then, you kind of lead them along the way. And how does it work in a, one-to-one setting or one-to-the team setting?
Well, how I like to work with the business or the owner, the business owner, leader, manager rather, is I take them through a 3-day, I call it Insights Immersion program, because this is a completely different understanding in terms of recognizing how our mind actually works, right? Mm-hmm. So it's helping people understand that, this calm clarity is already built into their system, right? What their experience in the world is coming through their thinking. Where these new fresh ideas are going to come from is not hiring, a consultant to bring into your business. Is actually going to come from inside you. So it's kind of like a paradigm shift. It's like if you grew up thinking the world was flat, and then somebody came along and said it's round, you'd say, like, I don't know. I don't know if that's right. So it takes time for people to kind of not only understand things at the intellectual basis, but to kind of have it kind of like sink in, so they know it at a more visceral level, and they'll start to respond from that place. Because it's a very different way of seeing how life works and how our own internal operating system works.
I agree that sometimes you have to sort of give people the space and time. Like, I'm not saying you lock them up for 3 days, but I love those programs where you actually have to take time off, whether it's an afternoon or 3 days, but to really detach from the the usual environment. So if you want fresh thinking, you cannot go back to exactly the same operating system and you think then you will have fresh thinking come from nowhere, right? So, going somewhere for even half a day, it makes a difference, because it's like you have to empty out. And I think you mentioned somewhere in work that a lot of times people spend lots of money and time and trying to fix this kind of problem, but it never seems to work. And I don't know whether that's the way you looked at it too, that, why people are not getting the results they want. And I think this quick fix, just pull some dollars into, by getting a consultant in, or, just very artificially pumping something into the mix. It's not going to work. It's inside out, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's because it's, our culture is so thinking focused. If you just think hard enough, you can figure this out. If you pick other people's brains, you can figure out that we often don't let that kind of settle and create a space for something actually new to emerge, right? We don't let that snow globe settle. It's all those little particles are constantly flailing around in there. And so the idea that you actually stop all that analyzing and assessing and comparing and almost for some people it feels counterintuitive. It's like, well, wait a minute, where else is the idea going to come from to solve this problem? And so it's interesting when when people who teach this understanding go into organizations, it takes people a little bit of time to understand we don't have the 10-step agenda here. We're going to get you to actually stop thinking so much and let this creativity emerge, right? So yeah,
I love it, because you're so right. Sometimes you cannot think your way out of this maze. In fact, you step back and stop thinking, the answer actually come to you. Very often our body know the answers. You know what food is good and bad for you.
right.
We don't have to think it out all the time. And it is true, like especially in this fast-paced society now, you kind of want the answer yesterday, right? So to ask people to stop thinking, stop working, stop pushing, take a step back to let it come to you, it felt very difficult. to do nothing for a minute, it's very hard.
Yeah, it's and yet people who understand how the mind works are very good at that. You hear a cute story about Edison. He went fishing every day because he knew that was a place where he'd have a nice quiet mind, and he came up with more of his innovations and things. And apparently he didn't put any bait on his hook because he didn't actually want to catch fish. He just wanted that, that sort of that, template of time to just let his mind relax, and because he knew that that's where his innovative ideas came from. So
yeah, what a beautiful story. And I cannot agree with you more, because this is actually what I've been coaching people as well, that sometimes people ask me, so how can you do all these things in this short period of time? It's because it's not about doing. Sometimes it's about not doing. And it's like you pause or even you stop, but then you can speed up very quickly because you know where you're going and how you're going to drive there, rather than wandering around the block 3 times. This is an art though. It's not easy, because it may sound easy to say, oh, just pause and then the answer come to you. It's not that easy, because these days I find it harder to do non-action than action, or convincing people to just take a break. It's actually harder to tell people than to tell them to work harder.
yeah, we've given all of this credence to our intellect.
Yes.
And the intellect is what we already know, our education, experience, all the expertise we've built up. But we've kind of dismissed the intuition as being like woo-woo or something like that, without recognizing that that's where the good stuff comes from that you haven't known up to now.
And it's also to be able to discern. I mean, there is some rabbit hole in some new age teaching as well, I reckon, but there are also a lot of germs. But then the thing is, if you are not able to discern them, then it can be a wise goose chase. But all that is said, I do think it's important to just take a step back and have, get some clarity one way or the other, whether work with a coach like yourself, or even just, go for a walk on your own, and it may come to you what may be the better next step. So to wrap this all up, I will first of all love to thank you for your time today, talking to us about clarity and different way of thinking about our so-called problems. One thing I want to add is that people say don't work harder but work smarter. Do you think this smarter notion felt challenging? Like, okay, so I have to think how to work smarter, like even this smarter idea. It's not easy.
I think if we recognize that we've got both. So we've got this intellectual body of knowledge, like we've we've got that, right? But when we understand there's also this insight or intuition or universal intelligence, whatever you want to call it. So when we've got both, we have so much more at our so much more capacity. And the thing is, what I found, when an idea comes up through what we call insight, it comes with a really nice feeling, like that feeling, like, that something just kind of like the penny drops, or kind of goes like thunk, or, it's like, oh, yeah, that's it, right? It comes like, it.
I know,
When it
I
comes
completely
through.
agree that feeling. And oftentimes what people are not aware is that when that inside feeling comes, it's not just the raw intuition. Actually, you have a lot of built-in knowledge and experience. Your data has been collected until this point. It's not just random basis. Actually, you have a lot of information stored in your mind. You just haven't pulled them out. But through this data bank, when the intuition or idea comes, it just kind of, it's a line.
It's
And
like
then
kind of merges.
it merges, it connects, the bridge
Yeah.
is set, and then you're like, that's the right decision, because you actually combine all these things together. And it is a process. It just, we have built in this sort of intelligent way of figuring things out without trying or pushing too hard, but it's to be at that place to let it come to us in some way. So anyway, I love talking with you about this clarity, and I think there's a lot more that you offer, like even a simple coffee chat will delight many. The contrary of what you first thought. So what is the best way for people to find you if they want to take a step further and learn more from you about clarity and the work you do?
Well, my website is quite simple. It's marlenecameron.com. And my email is marlene@marlenecameron.com. So pretty simple. Yeah.
So I guess that's the perfect place to start. So I will also put your details, the link on the show notes. So, but thank you so much. And I know we don't have the whole day, but because we can do this immersion and this conversation forever long. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.